Welcome to the Matcha Guardians podcast, brought to you by Matcha.com. Here we focus on the biggest trending health topics of our time, featuring the greatest and upcoming wellness advocates. Now, here are the Matcha Guardians, certified nutritionist Diana Weil and medical journalist Elara Hajib-Taras.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Matcha Guardians. We are so excited to introduce our guest, Elise Museles. She holds 4 certificates in holistic health and integrative healing. She is on the Environmental Working Group Board of Directors and has been a National Institute of Health grant recipient for 5 years in a row. She's a sought-after speaker, a wealth of knowledge. She has been the host of the popular Once Upon a Food Story podcast, so definitely check that out. Her work has been featured in the Oprah Magazine, Forbes, Health, Self, Elle, Well and Good, The Chalkboard, Mind, Body, Green, as well as other outlets. She is incredible. She knows everything, I'm convinced, and I cannot wait to get started. So, Elise, I just want to jump off right on the bat of you were an attorney in the Department of Justice, and now you are talking about food and wellness, and I'm just fascinated about how that happened.
Well, first, I just want to thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be here with the Matcha Guardians. I mean, that's a big role to fill. So, to answer your question, I have always been interested in health and wellness, and it wasn't even called wellness back when my interests started, but I grew up in LA, and I practiced law, I practiced immigration law, and I feel like the common link is that I helped people. I help people feel better. So a lot of the cases that I worked on were people who were coming over for asylum, or, they were coming to unite with their family members. And so it was just bringing people together to have happier lives. And hopefully the work that I'm doing with health and wellness is the same thing, to help people feel happier and healthier and better about themselves. So there's that. And I want to say that I probably always was meant to do what I'm doing now. I just had a little detour. And of course, it taught me a lot of things, like everything, all the different chapters we go through. But I've just always had this passion for taking care of ourselves. And it's, as we were talking before we hit record, it used to be about like being skinny when I grew up in LA. And now I'm just so thrilled that we see the value in feeling good and being healthy.
Absolutely. So our topic of our podcast today is food stories, which actually is this really cool term, Elise, that you've come up with. Could you just kind of delve in a little bit more into how you came up with that and what the exact definition is of a food story?
Sure. Okay. So your food story is written over years and years. And the way that it came about was in like 2013. I was seeing a lot of clients one-on-one, and I asked them, I'd just gotten certified in eating psychology. And so even though the conversation was so much about what we were eating, I knew that there was also this missing piece in the nutrition puzzle, the way that we think about food and, just what goes through our mind when we're eating. So I would ask people, tell me about your relationship with food. And I, across the board, got the same responses, like, it's complicated, or the eye rolls, or, oh, do you have to ask me that? Or, they just were very clipped and didn't want to go into it. And so I knew that there was a better approach. And at that time, that's when Oprah was really talking about story. So we had Brene Brown, like people were really talking about story and the value of story. And there was money story, love story, life story. And like, we have a food story. We are born into a food story. And whether we like it or not, we inherit so much of our thoughts and our beliefs and our habits and our likes and our dislikes, right away from the culture we, are brought up in. So I started thinking about it as a story, that we have different chapters, and that there are villains, and that there are heroes in your food story, and that there are themes, big themes that run throughout, and beliefs, oftentimes limiting beliefs. And so I tested it out. I would ask people, tell me about your food story. And it was just such a different way of thinking about it. And most people said, I've never thought about it as a food story, and then we talk about memories, and they remember why they're doing things that they're doing or when it started. And it lifted a lot of the shame that so many of us feel around food, and our eating challenges, because we realize it's not just us and food. there's a whole dynamic that plays into the way that we relate to food. And so it's just built on that. And that's my podcast is Once Upon a Food Story. And the other thing, it's so interesting to hear people's food stories. It helps us think of our own, when we all are sharing different parts of our food story, even if they aren't the same. I bet you were thinking about your food story as I was talking.
You read my mind, Elise. So one of the things that popped up into my head is I am Spanish and Portuguese. My father was born in Spain. My mother was born in the U.S., but her parents came over to the U.S. from Spain and Portugal. And one of my earliest memories of food is spending a summer in Spain and having to learn Spanish in order to basically be fed. And one of the first words I learned was leche, milk. And to this day, I am a big milk drinker, big fan of dairy. So that was kind of just the first thing that popped up into my head. Diana, what about you? Yeah, it's interesting. Mine's actually a little bit more negative, which I think is, what Elise was touching on with sort of this shame and diet culture. I remember, I guess this is kind of a long-winded answer, but I remember seeing a dietitian when I was 13. We were at boarding school and I just was sad, and so it was kind of like, what can we throw at this, me being so sad? And I saw this dietitian and I remember she asked me what was the first memory of being in my body. And my memories were very, it was like, I remember pinching the little fat on my belly. Like those were the memories that I had of being in my body. And that was, it's so closely tied with food. So I think, I love that Elara is like, milk, yay, milk. And mine was a little bit more negative, which I think is why the food story idea, Elise, and talking about it and giving people the opportunity to kind of think back through their food story and how food relates to their body, and that food can be this wonderful, positive, delicious cultural thing that doesn't have to be, pinching skin on your body. So I think it's really fascinating. And it kind of leads me to wonder, what is your food story? And or have you found a way to help people improve their food story? And what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, first I just want to respond. Isn't it interesting though that we have negative and positive parts of our food story, and it's okay. There's room for all of it, and especially growing up in, with all the media and the messaging and everything. And then I just want to respond to you, Diana, because when I think of you and see like what you share, I think you have like such a joyful like way with food right now. And so whatever the pain was before, like you're in a whole different chapter, you're just like happiness around food. Whenever I see your post, I feel that way.
Yeah, well, I think probably because I worked through it for myself. Like I saw food as the enemy, and then I was like, wait a minute, this is silly. Like food is literally fueling my brain, and so I think, yeah. But thank you for saying that because it has been, I had to work through that.
Mm-hmm. All right, and that also gives people hope too. So my food story, I'm going to give you an abbreviated version because I know we have a lot to talk about. But as I mentioned, I grew up in LA, and I'll just tell you a few pivotal things that really define my food story. So the first was when I went to a doctor and I was 9, and I was told that if I lost like 5 pounds that I could get my ears pierced. And back then you got your ears pierced at the doctor's office, and I really wanted to get my ears pierced. And so I went on my first diet. And at the same time, my dad was a sleep eater, which sounds so crazy. And he would like literally wake up in the middle of the night, eat, and then in the morning he'd feel not great and realize that he had eaten and was, wanted to do something to disrupt that behavior. And so we had like, the old fashioned, like the refrigerators that had, you pulled the handle, right? And so he locked a bicycle lock around it. But it had absolutely nothing to do with us, like absolutely nothing. I have a brother and a sister. It really had nothing to do with us. And like to this day, I can hear him at the top of the stairs. Want anything before I lock up? And so basically the message was that food was kept under lock and key. Like he would give my mom the key and she would hide it. And so he wouldn't go sleep eat. And there were no, like our parents, and I always want to say this whenever I talk about food story, that our parents, whoever your like main caretaker was, that they did their best with what they knew. Like nobody wants them to pass the message on, like food is kept under lock and key, right? And so we know differently now. Like I know differently than when my kids were even younger, than like I might not say things exactly the same way. So our parents did the best with what they had. But anyway, the message was that. And then I spent many years like in a very controlling relationship with food, thinking, that there was a perfect diet out there that was going to give me the perfect body. And I became obsessive with it. And I never was diagnosed with an eating disorder, but I know now with all the information we have that I had some form of what's called orthorexia, which was, like an obsessiveness with doing everything the right way and eating healthy and all of that. So it really took, when I became a mom, I made different shit. When I became pregnant, I started to take care of my body differently. But it really took when I went through the certification in eating psychology, did I realize how much harm my thoughts were having on my, stress levels. And then that was impacting me in a physiological way. So what I mean by that is like when you think stressful thoughts about food, whether they're true or not, like this is going to cause that, or, I shouldn't be eating this because it's bad. And I'm definitely putting in that quotes because that was my language then and not now. What happens is you create a stress response. So you raise your cortisol levels and then you have a whole cascade of hormonal effects. Your metabolism isn't working as efficiently. You're basically putting your body in the sympathetic state, and when you're having all those stressful thoughts and it's fight or flight. And so when I realized that, oh my gosh, what I'm thinking is like having a negative impact on all the quinoa and kale and great foods that I'm eating, it really stopped me in my tracks and helped me change my narrative around food. And those are the tools that I use with people. You asked about helping other people with their food story. It's not just about what you're eating. It's how you're eating and what you're saying to yourself while you're eating. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Now, Elise, just going back to your story. So in your opinion, one of the pivotal moments of turning the page, entering a new, more positive chapter in your food story was when you were pregnant. And I'm actually, to all the listeners and viewers out there, I'm actually currently 7 months pregnant. You can go ahead and listen to another episode where we focus on all things pregnancy. But it just made me think a little bit about, weight gain during pregnancy. It's this kind of taboo topic that can really be sensitive for a lot of women. I know that during the first trimester, when people would ask me how I was feeling, I really love that question. But one of the other top 5 questions I was often asked was, how much weight have you gained?
Yeah.
I always just was a bit taken back by that because I was like, well, I mean, why does it matter? As long as you're healthy and, you're generally eating the right things, you're moving your body, you feel good, your baby is healthy. I don't think there should be such a fixation on this scale. So
I agree
could you
with
just tell us a little bit more about that?
I think it's hard to at the beginning, to see the changes, but I also think that it's like a miracle, that it's really pretty incredible what can happen with the body. And it's that push-pull for so many people. And I wish that we didn't ask those questions. I wish that the conversation afterwards wasn't about, and I'm putting this in quotes because I wouldn't say bouncing back, like that's another thing that, your body will do what it needs to do. Maybe it needs to hold on to, some weight so that you can breastfeed or whatever. And so I wish there wasn't that pressure that we put on ourselves and that our society puts on us. And I think it's really up to us to just start changing the conversation. Like, what do you say when people ask you how much weight, I can't even imagine asking that question. So I can't even say it right now.
So I'm very honest about it. So the first thing I'm going to say is that Google is wrong. Google tells you that if you're generally a healthy weight, you should be gaining, I don't know, it's something like 25 to 35 pounds. Guess what? I am 8 weeks away from my due date. So that puts me at 32 weeks. I have gained almost 60 pounds, which I know for a lot of people that sounds like a lot, but I literally had an appointment this morning with my OBGYN stepped on the scale. I had been guzzling water because every time you go for an appointment, you have to, pee in a cup and do all these different tests. So I was like, oh, there's some water weight, blah, blah, blah. But he told me, he goes, your weight gain is perfect. You look great. The baby's healthy. My husband, he thinks that I'm radiant, that I look fantastic. I think that that's a really important thing to have as far as a base. I think the fact that my husband, I can tell, still looks at me with such admiration and looks at me like I'm beautiful, like I was a year ago, that means a lot, having that partner support. So I feel for women who are in a different position where maybe they feel a bit judged by their close loved ones. I think it's really important to have the people around you supporting you versus I have brothers that, they look at me after a couple drinks and they go, oh my God, Elara, like you're enormous. And I'm like, I know, like I feel enormous. That's usually my reaction. Or I have a friend who I saw for the first time the other day and she looks at me and the first thing she says is, oh my God, Elara, you got fat. And I was like, yes, I did. Because, before I was, and Diana can attest to this, before I was pregnant, I was very fit. I was very low body fat naturally. Like I didn't really have any breasts. And quite frankly, I love my more female shapely figure. And that's what I tell people. Like I love having larger breasts and larger hips. It's fun. And I know that it's not something that's necessarily permanent. And there's this incredible thing going on inside me that my body is doing. And as you said, Elise, right, this is the process. This is part of the food story. It's part of the journey. And I'm just enjoying it. And if I want to have a Shake Shack burger like I did 3 days ago, like I have it. I do not limit myself. And then, of course, I have my healthier days. But I just think you got to embrace it. YOLO. So I just tell people, yeah, you're right. And I'm okay with it. I hope that you're okay with it too.
It's a chapter in your food story. And like, if you end up having another pregnancy, that it might be a totally different, and that's the thing about a food story, body story, pregnancy story, whatever you want to call it, that there are different chapters and they aren't necessarily the same, and it's funny because I was thinking about how I end a lot of things with right now, and I don't know how that really evolved, but I do, because I think that we get so stuck in our ways and how we think it should be, right? Or it was, so it should be that again. But if you end it with, like, if you think about right now, well, this is how I'm feeling at the moment, and this is what's right for me at the moment. And then you're not like, I'll always be this way, or it has to be this way. It's very abstract what I'm talking about, but does it make sense to you? What you say, oh, this is how you feel right now. And I think it's great. And something you said, since it's close to the holidays, it made me think about how a lot of people have a hard time with their relatives or with, going places and the uncomfortable conversations about food. So it's sort of the same thing as like, the uncomfortable conversations or comments about your pregnancy and your body, not their body, your body. Right. So it's, you always have the option to change the conversation or to do what you do and say, you know what, I actually feel good, or I'm working on this right now, or, I'm taking care of myself in the way I know best, and that's the end of the conversation, right? I don't want to go any further. So there's ways to, I think, stop it without being rude, but also asserting how you feel.
Absolutely.
I've worked with clients in the past who have avoided going to the doctor because they don't want to be weighed. And I always like to remind people that when you go to a medical professional, that consent is involved and that you don't have to be weighed if you don't want to, and that it is okay to tell your doctor to not weigh you. So I always like to put that announcement out there. But at least we've been sort of talking about this from a woman's experience. And I think that there's a myth out there that maybe men don't experience this as well, or that they don't have their own food story. And I'm just wondering what you've noticed, maybe different patterns wise between men and women, and what men's food story looks like.
I'm so glad you asked this question. I haven't really talked about it, but first of all, I have 2 sons. So at first I was like, oh, maybe I was given sons because, of my past, that this might be easier. But the truth is everybody has a food story. Men, women, we all have a food story. And I like to tell this story about this 80-year-old client, a man who came to me. And I was so short-sighted at first. I was like, this isn't my typical clientele. I usually have younger and women and, and I wasn't sure I could help him. And his son brought him. And so his son had gotten in touch with me, and I was like, no, this is beautiful that the son wants to help him at 80 years old. Like, how could I not help him? And the long and short of it is that he had diabetes for 40 years. And he just said, I don't know what to eat, because every time, I go to the doctor, or it's been like drilled in me, is what I can't have. I can't have this. I can't have that. I said to him, like, what do you like to eat? And he almost started crying, because he's like, nobody's ever asked me that. In all these years, nobody said, what are the things you like, right? And so here, I guess, to answer your question is like, until, forever, right? You have a food story. And so we came up with things that he liked that he hadn't had in years. And it wasn't about not having things. It was about adding in things that he could have. So I think that we all deserve to feel good in our bodies, and to, enjoy food and enjoy it in a way that feels good, and to have like these shared experiences with food, no matter men, women, or however you identify.
Now, Elise, would you say among your clients, there is a pattern that's emerged as far as an age that people tend to go through their worst chapter in their food story?
I feel like when we're younger, we might have had a very bad chapter, but we don't have the wisdom, like what Diana was referring to earlier about being uncomfortable in her body at such a young age. But I think a lot of us reach a point, and it might not be in our 20s, it might be a little later in our 30s and 40s, where like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And I see a lot of new moms, or moms of like 7, 8, 9, like, I do not want to pass this down to my kids. Like, and the truth is, you got to help yourself before you can help your kids. So sometimes I'll have moms come to me and they'll want to help their daughters. And I'm like, we're going to work together first, because they see things, right? Kids are like sponges. They'll notice, they'll see you looking in the mirror and scowling at yourself. They'll notice that you're not eating at dinner, or that, whatever your patterns are. And so we want to be that example. We don't have to be perfect, because there's no such thing, but we want to be the example. We want to feel comfortable before we can help others. So that's an age, I think, when people really want to work on it's health. It's not even just food. I think as, a member of the environmental working group board, we see a lot of people come in when they have young families, because they're now realizing like, I've got to clean up my act, because I don't want my kids to be exposed to the same things too. But you don't have to be, like, the caveat is, you don't have to be a mom or a parent, to work on your food story. I just think that's a big entry point where people want to like write new chapters.
If someone does want to start working on their food story, if they're listening to this and they're like, maybe my food story is a little negative and I kind of want to change the trajectory, what would you say are like your top 3 tips for someone to maybe start working on their food story?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think also just acknowledging that you have a food story, because some people will say, oh, I don't have a food story. We all have a food story. Some have, more positive food story with a few negative chapters, and other people, can remember, struggling from as far back as they can remember. So I think it's acknowledging you have a food story, and just like letting it sit, like that language, that concept sit with you. And then identifying what are some of the big themes, because our story happens over our lifetime. So you can't possibly wrap your head around like every, part of your food story. But what are some big themes? It might be you never eat meals or sit down to meals. I don't know, make this okay. You start over again every single Monday, have that all or nothing mentality. So there's some pretty common themes. Actually, the second chapter in my book, Food Story, is about the 8 most common themes, or that you get overwhelmed or, confused, which is very easy to do. So just start really thinking about what your major theme is. And then one step further with that is to figure out when it started, because so often it's not even about the food. It could be that your parents were going through a divorce, you moved at that time, you were bullied at school and then wanted to like cover up or something. And so sometimes just tying it back to where it all began gives you so much insight. And then here's that right now thing. That's not my story right now, right? That was my story then, but it's not right now. And so it can help you release some of those things. Okay, so I have to think of a third one.
I mean, those are really good. So those are the two that you can give us.
Yeah.
I think that's
I'm sure we'll get into other tips too, but those are good starting places.
so. Going off of the theme of right now, Elise, if I have a friend that I suspect right now may be in a negative chapter of their food story, what's a smart and thoughtful way that I could approach them or have a conversation about it with them?
It's so tough because you have to be ready to do the work yourself. So like you might be able to alert your friend to what you're seeing. But is your friend going to be defensive? Are they going to, I think it's really, really challenging. And maybe your intention could be, I just want to create awareness for her right now, and that I'm not expecting to be able to heal everything, but this is a good starting point. And I would always come from the angle of being worried about and concerned, and even sharing some struggle you might have gone through so that she feels less alone. And it's not like a defensive, like, you're this way. Just say, I'm concerned about this. And I remember when, I felt this way too, or when I was struggling and I'm here for you, kind of thing, as opposed to putting them on the defensive. And oftentimes people won't acknowledge that there's a problem. I mean, you see that, and I don't want to get too far into eating disorders, but you see that a lot with eating disorders, and so I would rather talk about a disordered behavior, which is, it requires a different kind of support. And I feel more qualified to talk about that too. But, you're talking about like restricting or, right, or just having a distorted body image or something like that.
One thing that I also think can be helpful, kind of talking about the mother-child relationship where you model good behaviors. I think that can also be helpful with your friends, that if you don't talk negatively about your body in front of your friends, or you don't talk negatively about food, or they, if they come to you complaining about their weight, maybe that's just a subject that you kind of shut down in a pot, like not mean, but just kind of don't give attention to. I also think that maybe that can be helpful as well, or at least that's something that I try to practice in my own life, because I just, I'm not interested in hearing about how little someone ate that day, unless they're coming to me as a client and we're working on it together. And then I'm all for it. Tell me about it.
I think that really strikes a chord with myself and my own food journey, that I never really considered food anything less than fuel because I was an athlete at a young age, until I got to that high school, college age where it was actually my friends, not my mother, not my father, not my brother's grandmother that ever commented about what I was eating. It was my friends that started to do it. Like there was a lot of, are you really going to eat that?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that a lot? Like, how are you going to burn that off? And then kind of listing what they ate during the day. And I would just kind of, okay, why are you telling me this? But over time, like it did for a period of time impact me in my eating. And I thought, oh, well, am I going about eating the wrong way? Should I, be concerned with these things in X, Y, and Z? So one of the things I love about my relationship with Diana is that we celebrate food. We've never been the type to kind of call each other up and say, oh my God, like I feel so bloated, or like I just overate so much. Like that's never been our rhetoric, which I really value.
I agree.
I know. I think it's so hard. And it's true that your friends really influence. I mean, there was like a skit a long time ago. It was with Amy Schumer, and it was all talking about food guilt, and it was like a group of women sitting around the table. I don't even remember. It was on YouTube, but they were all talking about how guilty they felt, like they ate their kids' muffins, and it was a whole thing about food guilt. And it's just, we definitely can egg each other on. And even though we think that we're being like, we're speaking the same language and being supportive, it does have a negative impact, and I do think the conversation is changing. I don't know if you're feeling that, but I do think the conversation is changing a little bit, but it's up to us to say, like, can we talk about something more interesting, or to actually change the topic, and not partake in that. Like sometimes I'd rather go on a walk with a friend than sit and eat and like discuss all of that. And I just feel like we have better conversations, than when everything is centered around food. And, so I think the awareness is always the first step. Like if you know that your friend group is going to be talking about that, divert it. There's something I talk about called food noise. And, food noise can come from the media, it comes from diet culture, obviously. And it's just all the conversation that we hear. And we will never, ever, ever get rid of food noise. Like it's just too much a part of of the dialogue, but you can change how you respond to it. So that is the same thing, the food noise coming from your friends. And food noise can be like you walk into your kitchen and you have like protein powder from like some cleanse that you did. And it's like, it subconsciously is still in your body, like where you see it and you're reminded of, oh, I didn't follow through with that, or some sort of feeling. So I always try to get people to like think about where their food noise is coming from, because it's all around us, and be able to like reduce some of it as much as you can, and then think about how you're going to react to it.
I think that's wonderful, especially changing the setting with your friends. Like you don't need to go out and it always be over a big meal or a girls' night. You can take a walk. You can take a yoga class together. You can walk the dogs together. You can go shopping. There's a lot of different things you can do outside of just, breaking bread together, which is a really good point.
Yeah. I mean, I love to entertain and have meals together too. And I think that's really important. But if you know that it's going to be triggering, divert.
So to kind of change the topics a little bit, speaking of diverting, you do so many things, which I don't know how you have time for any of it, but one of the
I
one of the
don't.
things that you do is that you create recipes. And I just am really curious what that process looks like, and how do you go about, like, if someone is wanting to get into cooking and they are, trying to develop a recipe or want to take something that they like and make it their own. Like, how does that process work for you?
Okay, well, I have to tell you a little secret. I don't cook from recipes when I cook for myself. I'm such an intuitive, like, cook, I guess, and I'm not a chef, and that's what I think makes my recipe so relatable, is that I am not a chef, and so things are pretty simple. But I like to just like toss it all together. But of course, because I develop recipes, now I do follow recipes and when I'm creating them. But when I'm just cooking for my family, there's not even a recipe in sight. And I think that that's a really freeing way for people, once you get the hang of it, like that, your soup base is going to have onion, garlic, carrots and celery, some broth, you know what I mean? Like that you can kind of do, either of you cook intuitively, or do you follow recipes?
I'm an intuitive cooker as well. For better or worse, I have learned that the one thing I couldn't get away with cooking intuitively was dumplings. That
Oh,
did not
yeah.
work out well the first time, although I did execute it on the second attempt. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm also just kind of like, I kind of know the general baselines of what to do if I'm making a soup, if I'm, roasting something, and then I love to just work with what I got.
I'm a recipe follower.
You are. But that's good that we're all different.
Like, I get scared. Like, you guys talking about just cooking freely, I'm like, that sounds terrifying.
Well, sometimes it ends up better and sometimes it ends up worse. I mean, I guess that's kind of the trick of it, is sometimes I'll make, like, I made penne alla vodka the other night from scratch, a sauce, and my brother loved it. He said, "What did you do?" I went, "Oh, well, I don't really know. I generally do a
Yeah.
little bit of this, a little bit of that." I added pancetta this time. Usually it's a vegetarian dish, but it's sometimes you can't replicate it, where there's some beauty in that, but you're also kind of like, oh, I wish I could make it just like I made it that
Yeah.
night.
So, Elise, how do you start? Like, how do you do it? Give us tips. Teach me.
I want to talk about where I get inspired. And I think that'll help. So I get inspired when I travel a lot, because I think when you travel, most of the time you're not cooking as much, if you're cooking at all. And so I get a lot of inspiration. I just came back from Portugal and Spain. And in Portugal, they tell me, Elara, if I'm right, I took cooking classes everywhere I went.
Ooh.
And the chef said that the Portuguese start every lunch and dinner with a soup. That they start with like a really simple pureed soup. So it's even like water as a base, and then let's say pumpkin and chestnuts or whatever the season is, that the soup is just vegetables pureed. And I was like, that is such a great way. It's so cozy. It's warming. It's a good way to get vegetables. It's a great way to start a meal. So now I'm going to be making a couple pureed soups because of Portugal, And so that was inspiring for me there. Or if I go to a restaurant, I may not try to do like a copycat, but it just will be like, oh, I never thought of these flavors together, or adding this nut into my salad. So I pick up like little tip things here and there and then make it my own. And the farmer's market, that is my number one source for inspiration. And I would recommend it, your listeners have a farmer's market near them and they have access to it. It is such a great way to stay local, to support the farmers, but just to be around the food that's nature intends us to eat right now at that time. And that for me, like my farmer's market days are always like the most inspiring. If I'm in a food rut, I go to the farmer's market, I come back and I've got lots of ideas. So does that help?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still intimidated, but maybe I'll be inspired tonight.
But Diana, how often, like, I know there's some people that say on a Sunday or Monday, they do meal prep and they know exactly what they're cooking for the whole week. They buy all the groceries on Sunday. Everything is lined up.
I'm that
Is that
person.
like the extent to what you plan?
You're organized.
It's financially responsible and organized. My husband would love if I actually cooked that way versus being like, I don't know, I'm going to go to the supermarket and figure it out. And it's going to be a surprise when you get home.
Yeah, I I pick a couple of recipes for the week and then I go to the grocery store and, and I'll modify. Like if, like I'll taste the recipe and be like, oh, I think it needs a little bit of this or a little bit of that. But looking at a pantry and saying, what am I going to make for dinner tonight gives me so much anxiety. So I just, I'm like, give me my recipes. Elise, I need you. I need the recipe developers. So thank you.
What about social media? Do you both either use like social media for recipe inspiration? Like I have a little saved category under Instagram that I kind of just save recipes. And if I'm really, I don't know, looking for inspiration, I'll dip into that reservoir sometimes.
Yeah, I save too. And I think there's some really talented content creators out there. It's hard to go, there's so much going on social media. Sometimes for me, at least, with all this, like it's harder to go back and remember. I wish that it was an easier process somehow, but I do think that there are great ideas floating around. And if someone is looking for inspiration, I mean, the only problem with it is like, just make sure it's a trusted source, because a lot of people I go through a whole process. I have to test my recipes before I'm sharing them with the public. And, I'm not sure everybody is like that. And the worst is if you make something and it just doesn't taste good, and you spend all this time chopping and paying for the ingredients and cooking. And it's, so I am a little selective about whose recipes I will make.
Well, so everyone knows, though, that Elise tests her recipes and they are good. So it's a trusted source for everyone listening.
Tested and approved. So jumping to another topic that just popped up into my mind, I am going to mention first that food challenges. So right now, my husband and I, we are members of a CrossFit gym and they have a food challenge going on. I am not participating for obvious reasons of being, 7+ months pregnant, but the challenge in place is that you have to eat at least 800 grams of fruit or veggies a day. And it just got me thinking, in your opinion, Elise, also Diana, what are your thoughts on food challenges? Can they be a good thing? Is it something that can maybe help people jumpstart their food journey in a healthier direction, especially during the holidays when a lot of people feel like they fall off the track?
I have mixed feelings about it. My biggest concern is that when it's unrealistic or life gets in the way because we're human and that happens, then there's the guilt and the whole spiral about not being able to, do this successfully and I can never follow through or what's wrong with me and all of that. So I think that part's really hard. But I also think there's something about like a challenge that's fun, and it could, like you said, jumpstart, but is it realistic? And so I think that's really, even the word challenge can be like a little triggering for people too. So maybe there's like a realistic way that you can go about changing your habits. Um, I always say like small changes have a big impact. So it could be, I'm going to add in one new fruit this week, or I'm going to make sure that I eat greens at least one or two meals or whatever, so whatever's realistic. I feel like that is easier than like actually measuring and having to have the 800 grams. Like when you said that, I'm like, no, for me, you know, but if it would just be like, I think it has to be something that naturally fits into what you're already doing. So you could add one more vegetable into your smoothie, like, or one more, healthy fat onto your salad. So I think it's that if you're habit stacking, that is a much more successful method for success.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I think we're a very similar mindset here. I think the problem with the 80 grams for me is that
800. It's 800,
grams
which is
is that requires measuring and logging, and to me that can lead to obsession. Kind of what Elise was saying. Like sometimes I will challenge, I'm putting in quotations, maybe the challenge is to get 5 vegetables a day and 3 fruits, but that doesn't require obsession or logging or weighing. That can kind of just be a mental of like, how many vegetables did I get? It doesn't have to be perfect. Or like Elise adding in spinach or whatever, like adding one more green. Whereas that can be something that you're challenging yourself with, but it's not whipping out the food scale, logging obsessively, tracking. And I think that can go down a negative road for a lot of people.
okay. So this brings me to another question. It's the holiday season. What are just a few tips that you would give someone that's going to be attending a lot of holiday parties to just stay balanced and have a healthy relationship with food?
Well, I'll start with one, and it might not be what people like. I used to be like, make sure you eat beforehand and have all these like, I'm sure they're helpful and effective. But I also think that what's even more important is that we have to give ourselves some grace. Like the holidays come once a year. I mean, you don't want to feel terrible in your body or terrible about yourself. But at the same time, you don't want to miss out, right? Because I mean, something that I really have learned, um, I've learned this year, my dad died about 6 months ago. And it's like, you can't get those experiences back. And I would just hate for someone to miss out because they're worried that they're going to indulge. I'm going to put that in quotes, like it's so much more nourishing to spend time with people you love than to restrict yourself and not even go there, whether it's physically be there or even be there and mentally be in a different place. So I'm not saying, oh, just go crazy and then come home and feel bad about yourself. But like, it's the holidays and you're human and you can make choices that feel really good in your body, but you don't have to expect yourself to eat exactly the same way you do the rest of the year.
That's very good advice. Kind of to piggyback off of that, what are things that you do every day that you feel like talking to you, I think you're healthy, not just physically, but emotionally, like mind, body. You've done a lot of healing, and a lot of, it's very clear that you've done a lot of work. And I'm just curious, what are the things that you do every day that you feel like are really important for, I mean, if we're talking, there's that quote of like, it's not between Thanksgiving and New Year's that we need to really focus on. It's between New Year's and Thanksgiving. So what are the things that you really focus on between New Year's and Thanksgiving on a daily basis that are important for your life?
Actually, I would say that I focus on them all year round. So I don't think like, oh, throw in the towel and like, don't try to feel good, forget about your habits. I'm just saying if you go, I mean, how many parties are people going to? I mean, if you go to 5 parties, right? And the parties that, what I'm saying? So, okay, so I don't forget all my good habits come Thanksgiving and then start them up again in January. I try to do my things every day. So, all right, morning routine is key. I can't even like stress enough how, I mean, people say it's like trite, whatever, the way you start your day affects the whole rest of it, sets the tone for the rest of it. But for me, it's really about not being reactive. That means, and it's really hard, not picking up your phone first thing, responding to emails, like first, like taking a few breaths, doing what you need to do so you can get into your body. So I go to nature. I'm so fortunate that I live in the middle of Washington, D.C., and I still like have nature all around me. And so I have a dog, which that forces you to, go outside early in the morning. I go outside, I get sunlight in my eyes, I move my body, breathe in fresh, clean air. Amazing. Like such a good way to start the day. Movement is definitely my therapy. And I am obsessive about getting movement in every day, but not in a way that's punishing and not in a way that I'm like tracking. I do it because I am such a better person. I think clearer, like everything about me is better when I move my body. I feel more connected. And so I don't want to say like I'm compulsive about it, but like I just know that that's going to help me in my day. And then I have a matcha ritual, which is like one of my favorite rituals. It's kind of my me time. And, I know I'm flooding my body with nutrients. And, I changed. I used to have it at a different time of day. And now, Diana, you and I have talked about this. I'm an 11 a.m. ish. It's not always exact, but matcha ritual. Like that's my break in the morning after I've gone through my other stuff and emails. I'll sit and like center with my matcha ritual. And I also think it's really important just to be like proactive about your mood, and to not wait until you're stressed to do the things that are going to help you de-stress. And I think so many of us make that mistake and we're like, oh, I'm stressed. I need to take deep breaths, or I'm stressed. I need to go for a walk or whatever. But what about going for a walk or taking the deep breaths because you don't want to get stressed? And so I think that's been one of the biggest changes for me. And then also not being obsessive with food. I know what foods make me feel good. I know what foods don't work as well in my body. And, I'm making the choice to eat the things that make me feel good because like, that's how I'm going to be in my optimal state, not because I'm punishing myself or restricting, but that at the end of the day, don't we all want to feel good and think clearer? And, so it's not hard for me to choose the healthier option because it's coming from that place, and there's not pressure. It's like, I want to feel good. So the thing I'm really bad about is boundaries. I work too late. And so I am still working on that. I wouldn't say that I've cracked the code on social media, and some of the things that are habits that aren't serving us well, but I'm always a work in progress with those things, the boundaries with the screens and work. I hope I answered that. I mean, there's so much more to the day, but it's really at the end, like the bottom line is being proactive.
Well, I think that that is a perfect opportunity. You mentioned matcha, which you are such a matcha expert. And
Expert, I don't know, but
well, you
lover,
matcha
yes.
lover. So I think we have two questions that we want to end on, but then we're hoping that we can bring you back to kind of be our matcha queen. Elara, do you want to end on our questions?
What is a life lesson, Elise, that you have had to learn the hard way?
Okay, I mentioned it earlier, but it is because it has such a profound effect on me, but just how perfectionism is really like there's no such thing as being perfect, and that the chase for perfection is just, I mean, it's not life-giving, it takes away from your life. And that I think just like recognizing that we're humans and that we do things that don't serve us, or we don't do things that, might be Instagram worthy or whatever, like that's okay. It's all part of it. And just like growing from those, whatever the mistakes along the way, and not beating ourselves up. So that's something I've had to learn the hard way, because I am definitely tough on myself. If I were going and living my life over again, I would really try to release that whole mask of perfection.
Absolutely. I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to, right? Wanting to be the best versions of themselves. But going back to the statement you said earlier, it's about, being here right now and living in the now and enjoying the present moment.
Yeah, that's so true because perfection, you're always in pursuit, and you can't really be totally present if you're trying to achieve the unachievable.
Achieve the unachievable, or you're analyzing the past to kind of project a positive future instead of just right here today together.
Yeah.
And then what about for our second life lesson question? What is a piece of advice maybe you learned from a family figure or a friend that you live by, that you would say is something that someone said to you and it's stuck and it's kept you in so many ways on a good track in life?
Mm. Okay, so I actually have something that we have really talked about. So it's nice because it's coming full circle. So my dad said something to me in passing, and it wasn't even meant to be a big deal, but it really stuck with me. And that's, you're allowed to change your mind, right? You're allowed to change your mind. So think about that right now, what we talked about. So this is true for me right now. It might not be true for me later, So like you're allowed to change your mind about, how you say things, the way you approach things, your philosophy, your limiting beliefs that you like are so stuck. So many of us are stuck in it. Well, I believe that. I've always believed that, but maybe it's not true for you right now. Right. So you can change your mind. And the last chapter of my book is all about evolving, evolving your food story. So that's you can change the way that you do things. You're allowed to grow and evolve and not stay stuck. So that's it. You're allowed to change your mind.
Ooh, I got chills. That's a really good one. You have been just such a wealth of knowledge, so many life lessons here. Where can people find you? Where can people learn more from you?
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. And I love your dynamic, and I'm very excited about your podcast. My website is my name. It's elisemuseles.com. I have a podcast, and I'd like both of you to be guests on my show. It's called Once Upon a Food Story, and you can listen to that wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm on social media as my name, Elise Museles, and Instagram is probably my, preferred platform. And you can get on my newsletter, and my book, Food Story, is available where all books are sold. I think I covered it all.
And we'll put it in the show notes as well, so you can go find Elise, because she really is. She's got, below. She is just like I said before, just such a wealth of knowledge and has so many life lessons to teach us. So thank you very much. And we're bringing you back.
We're bringing Elise back. We're definitely going to be talking about all things matcha at some point later on this season. But if you have any other ideas, topics that you think would be really fun to pick Elise's brain, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear.
Thank you again. And what a great dynamic duo you are. I really appreciate being part of it. It was a fun conversation, and we covered a lot of ground.
We did. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Sip, savor, and live well with new episodes of the Matcha Guardians every Wednesday. Follow our show for free on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now. Leave your questions and comments below. Find us on Instagram at The Matcha Guardians, or click on matcha.com.